Well, greetings. How are you this evening? The book of Daniel uses a phrase 3 times that I have not yet explained. Excuse me. So I'm going to do that right now before we continue where we left off in the middle of Daniel 11. That phrase is the abomination of desolation. So what is that? Somebody actually asked me that this week. I'm sure they were pretty serious, but then again, maybe they just wanted to see if I could explain it. It's a very difficult question to answer. What is the abomination of desolation? I use that phrase in my translations whenever I'm dealing with it. It appears in three verses in Daniel and in Matthew 24, where Jesus is quoting Daniel. Now, the best explanation I can give is this: something that is so evil that it wipes out everything that is good. It's more than that. So think about it this way. Abomination means something that is so disgusting that it causes extreme fear and even hatred just by its very presence. Desolation. It's like a land that had an army just knock down every building flat, and they killed every person and every animal and destroyed every crop. Desolate. Nothing left alive. Abomination, disgusting to the point of inspiring, creating fear and hatred. Now, the rest of my explanation is probably of little interest to most people, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. You can kind of glaze over your eyes because it's going to get a little technical. So I said this phrase is found only 4 times in the Bible: Daniel 9:27, Daniel 11:1, and Daniel 12:11. So I should have already given you this before tonight's lesson. I apologize. Matthew 24:15, Jesus is quoting Daniel. So those are the 4 times it appears. And there are a large number of variations of phrases used in different translations. The most common translations, most commonly used interpretation translation, there's 4 different phrases or variations of those phrases. Overspreading of abominations. There are a lot of translations that use that. Wing of abominations that make things desolate. Not bad. Overspreading of abominations, I don't get that one. Wing of detestable things, kind of like wing of abominations that make things desolate. But I think wing of detestable things is abomination of desolation. And the other of the 4 most commonly used is desolating monstrosities. Now, if I didn't use abomination of desolation, I would probably use overspreading of abominations. You can figure that one out. By the way, the King James uses overspreading of abominations. The New King James, usually they're pretty close. The New King James takes out the these and thous for the most part, maketh and taketh and all the tuths. But the New King James does not use overspreading of abominations. It uses wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. I don't get it. I mean, they're usually sort of in sync, and I'd criticize the difference, but I'm not sure which is more difficult to understand. I guess I'm leaning against the New King James. Whatever. The 3 translations I quote from the most: New International Version, New Living Translation, and Message Bible. New International says, abomination that causes desolation. That's not bad. I get that one. New Living Translation, probably the best of these three in my opinion, says sacrilegious object that causes desecration. I still think it's short, but of these three translations, I think it's the best. And the Message Bible, I don't get. Desecrating obscenity. I know they try and simplify the Bible, but come on. Let's at least stay somewhat close to Scripture. They do stray occasionally, but not terrible. And this isn't a terrible stray. They're just weak, in my opinion. Interestingly, in the Message Bible, the book of Daniel is consistent, desecrating obscenity. But in the New Testament, where Jesus quotes Matthew 24:15, he quotes Daniel, and the Message Bible uses monster of desecration. Desecrating obscenity in the Old Testament, monster of desecration in the New Testament. They should be consistent. So why is there a difference? Okay. Glaze your eyes over even further, because this is a lesson in how translations are done. I've probably given it to you before, but I'm going to share it again. Bible translators work in groups, usually. And each group is assigned a different group of books. Typically, a smaller group combines all of the work done by the groups and may or may not even include the original translators. More often than you'd expect, when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, the different translations are missed. However, remember that most, if not all, of the New Testament was written in Greek. I believe all. Some believe most. And the Old Testament was written in Hebrew or Aramaic. So they're different languages. The scholars are going to come up with different translations, but I still think when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament ought to go to the New Testament ought to go to the Old Testament. People say, hey, brothers, sisters, what are you coming up with over there for this one? I got to match you. Really? Are you sure I think this? You see what I'm saying? So I suggest when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament that you use your Bible's cross-reference to read the Old Testament text. It may be different, probably not vitally different, but it might give you a little different perspective, especially in the book of Hebrews. I do a lot of cross-references there. And a lot of them don't match up so good. So the Old Testament sometimes gives us a different perspective on what we might take out of the New Testament. Who knows? All right, let's get into Daniel 11. We'll finish Daniel 11 tonight. I'm not sure how far I'll get into Daniel 12, if at all. Daniel 11, 33 through 35. Almost 10 minutes, and I've just started. Okay, 33 to 35. Wise teachers influence many, but some of these teachers will die by the sword or by fire, while others will be put in prison and robbed. During those terrible times, they will not receive much help, and many who will join them will not be committed to them. Some of the teachers will die during the persecution. Those will be refined, cleansed, and made pure by going through those days. The appropriate time will come later. It seems as though this portion of Daniel's vision is talking about the elders of Israel, wise teachers. And they're examples and advisors to the Israelites. But some will be killed during these times that Daniel's describing. Some will be put in prison, some will be robbed. The angel even tells Daniel that the people of Israel will not give them much help and will, for the most part, avoid association with them. But then the angel tells Daniel, those teachers will be refined and purified like gold is refined and purified by fire. In other words, they will receive their eternal reward. And then that chapter or that verse or paragraph, whatever, it concludes with the appropriate time will come later. This refers to the end of time, and we're going to see that shortly. Daniel's already seen that once before in this vision. He's going to see it again. Verses 36 to 39. The northern king will do whatever he wants. He will proclaim himself to be greater than every god. I got to stop there. Remember, in the first part of Daniel 11, he's talking about the northern king going against the southern king and slaughtering them, the southern king going back against the northern king a few years later and slaughtering them, and back and forth. And Israel, I told you this last time, Israel's right in the middle. So every time they go through on their way to attack, they take the food they need from Israel. On their way back, if they're victorious, or maybe if they lost, they just destroy Israel. I mean, they take everything. Because on their way there, they don't have, they don't need a bunch of stuff to drag along with. On their way home, why not? Take everything you can get your hands on. So anyway, the northern king will do whatever he wants. He will proclaim himself to be greater than every god, including the God of all gods. He will be successful, but only until the appointed time arrives. What is supposed to happen will happen. He will disregard the gods of his fathers, the god women worship. He will disregard every god and claim he is greater than all of them. Instead of those gods, he will worship a new god that is the God of his fortress. This God that was not known by his fathers or their fathers, he will honor with a great deal of gold, silver, and precious jewels. He will attack the strongest fortresses with the help of his new God. He will honor those who submit to him. He will make them the rulers of many people and will divide the land among them as their reward. Nasty king. The nastiest, huh? Maybe. Well, probably during this time frame, at least in my opinion, the nastiest. What do you think? Oh, by the way, if we're looking at this in terms of the end times, I'm going to come to that in more serious detail later. This God could, or this king could be the Antichrist. And what would that mean? He will disregard the gods of his father and his father's father, the gods the women worship. He'll disregard every god and claim he is greater than all these gods. He'll worship a new god that is the God of his fortress. Could be talking about the Antichrist or the servant of the Antichrist. More detail about that in the book of Revelation, which I already covered. You can go research there. Verses 40 to 43 of chapter 11. When the appropriate time for the end arrives, the king of the south will attack the king of the north. The king of the north will respond with all of his horses and chariots, plus a very large number of ships. He will invade many countries and conquer each of them easily. He will invade the land of God's people of his covenant. While many nations will be conquered, Edom, Moab, and Ammon will not be conquered. He will gain control of many countries, even Egypt. He will plunder all the wealth of Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia, taking all of their gold and silver. Well, we can just say the king of the north wins big time. He did not attack Israel with ships. Okay, I got that. But he would have attacked everyone along the coast. So a little bit of Israel. But he needed ships to attack Egypt. He probably attacked them by land and by sea. And they weren't doing Air Force yet. Why did he not conquer Edom, Moab, and Ammon? Do you know? Well, you'd know if you knew your geography. You see, they are on the east side of the Dead Sea. And he was probably going south through Israel, which is on the west side of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. So those nations over there, they kind of got away with. I mean, Ammon was further north, but east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. So they kind of got skipped over. And he plundered all the wealth of Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. What do they have in common? Well, Egypt is right here at the northeast corner, and Libya is west of Egypt, and Ethiopia is south of Egypt. So it was a big-time win for the king of the north. Verses 44 to 45, then news from the east and the north frighten him. He will respond with anger and set out to eliminate many. He will camp between the sea and Mount Zion. There he will meet his end, and no one will help him. What news caused him to head home fast? Well, if you take this to be talking about shortly after Daniel's time, historical records tell us that the Antiochus, the king of the north, that his kingdom was being attacked by the Parthians on the east, and Persia, or the Armenians are attacking him. So his kingdom's Persia. So he's facing enemies. Well, he's down plundering Egypt. Well, he stopped near Mount Zion and died there. All right, another break, time out, break, whatever. End times, I don't focus on end time study very often. I accept the end times as inevitable. I do not focus on end time studies. I focus on living for today and accept that end times will happen when God determines. I simply want to be prepared for Jesus' second coming. As Jesus said in Matthew 24:36, only God himself knows when the end times will come. And there's nothing we can do about that. You know, there are 39 books in the Old Testament. Daniel's the only one, and then it's only 3 chapters out of Daniel that focus on end times, or it could be interpreted that way. There are 5 books in the New Testament that are historical, the Gospels and Acts. There's a little bit of it about end times in Matthew 22 to 24, but there's not much. There's a little bit in Thessalonians, but not much. Well, Thessalonians is Paul. So there are 13 letters by Paul, 21 epistles total, and they focus on how to live for today. Only one book out of 66 focuses on end times, and that's the book of Revelation. And as we're going to see at the end of Daniel, and we can see in Revelation, God does not intend for you and I to understand major parts of these books. I do not focus on end times. If people want, I will do a study on end times, which will be trying to pull all of Scripture together. It has been many years since I've done that, and I don't have the recording of that. It was pre-internet days. It's been a long time. It was actually 1986 and 87. So, but I can do it again. If somebody wants that, I will do that. But end times is just not my thing. But Daniel deserves some concepts about end times. So before moving on to Daniel 12, It seems important that we shift from short-term to long-term fulfillment of Daniel's vision. This implies that the last few verses of Daniel 11 refer to the end of time, as many believe. And I'm going to sort of quote what I wrote in regards to Daniel 9:24-27. But modern end times preachers say that Daniel 9:24-27, 70 weeks, represent 490 years. 70 weeks, aka years, times 7 days equals 490 years. That's how the Jews did do these phraseologies. And those 490 years can be split. Most of them claim, that's what they say, most of them claim that the first week, 40 is 49 years, 7 times 7 is 49 years, and that's how long it took to rebuild Jerusalem. And then the next 62 weeks are the subsequent 434 years until the Messiah would arrive. I kind of get that. That's 62 times 7, by the way, is 434 weeks. And that matches the historical records we know of. But the last week is the 7 years of the tribulation. So they take the first 69 weeks, and that's the rebuilding of the temple and up to the coming of the Messiah. But these so-called end times scholars then say, seventh week, it doesn't happen until the tribulation. So, yeah, I get where they're coming from. I just don't worry about it. So let's do this a little, looking at Daniel 11. Let's look at it a little differently than most end-time scholars would. Let's begin by considering how Daniel's vision has been considered over the centuries. Remember that Daniel's vision was meant for the Israelites, and their nation is in the middle of everything in his vision. Of course, the early parts of this vision seem to very much apply to Persia, Greece, and Rome. And that interpretation has been somewhat consistent over the years. Not exactly, but let's look at it. If you look at history, during Paul's day, let's take 50 AD just as a rounded number. It's before the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, but after the resurrection of Christ. So how would the early Christians have viewed Daniel 11's two kings? And that's what this is going to focus on. Probably Persia in the north and Egypt in the south? No, almost certainly not. Egypt was at that time part of the Roman Empire. So that could have been the king of the south. But the Parthian Empire was the successor to the Persian Empire for a while. And the Parthian predecessor to Iran, the people we call Iran today. Frankly, the Parthian Empire was not very strong because it was the neighbor to the Roman Empire, who controlled Egypt and all the coast and all of Turkey, what we call Turkey, and Greece and Italy, and more. So the Parthian Empire was much smaller and much weaker. So how would believers at 50 AD have interpreted Daniel 11? Probably two different Roman kings fighting each other, or Roman generals, whatever, Caesars. Maybe. After all, that did happen. Or would it have been Persia fighting Southern Roman Empire, or Parthenon? I don't know. I don't think so. How about 500 AD? Just jump ahead. Israel's been absorbed into the Roman Empire. The new Persian Empire has the major power over a great many people to the east. They don't have Turkey or Greece or Rome. So there were two major powers north of Israel, Persia and Rome. And Rome was the major power in Egypt. How would the believers of that era have interpreted Daniel 11? You can see where I'm going. 1000 AD, Israel's still gone. Islam controls Egypt, as well as the Islamic people control Egypt, as well as Saudi Arabia, and up through the Promised Land, as well as everything to the east of the Jordan River, all the way up through what's modern Iraq, Iran, even up into Afghanistan and Pakistan. Daniel 11, two kings, Persian king versus Persian king, I guess. I don't know. Islamic king versus Islamic king. 1800, Egypt and Saudi Arabia are the two most powerful kingdoms to the south of Israel. Frankly, not very powerful. North of Israel was Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey. Not very powerful. What would the believers of 1800 have viewed? How they would have viewed Daniel 11? I don't know. Today, continuing our focus on Daniel 11, the two kings, king of the north, king of the south, many, if not most, end-time experts consider Egypt as the king of the south, although some say it's Saudi Arabia is the greater power. I say Egypt because Egypt is more anti-Israel, and Saudi Arabia is more like get along to get along, you know? So, go along to get along. And some consider Persia, now Iraq and Iran today, to be the king of the north. Others consider Russia to be the king of the north that's going to attack into the Armageddon. But others say it's a revived Roman Empire. Of course, many end-time scholars insist the United States must be inserted into all of this, especially those scholars from the United States. Most common viewpoint of modern Bible scholars, the United States, their only part will be to support Israel. And we can see that. You know, talking about biblical prophecies, some biblical prophecies are fulfilled only one time. However, some can have an immediate fulfillment and a fulfillment that is in the distant future. Someone once perfectly described this. I don't know who it was. He said something like, if someone is looking at two mountain peaks that are lined up exactly together, and the taller one is behind the shorter one, from your perspective, whoops, how do I get my fingers lined up here? Having trouble with that. The taller one is behind the shorter one, but because you're down low, you only see the shorter one until you climb the shorter one. And there's a bigger one behind it. That's kind of like two prophecies. It's easier to see the first one than to see the second. Remember that Daniel 10:14 says these things will happen in the last days. So in Daniel's vision, Antiochus seems to fulfill the prophecies in the short term. He was the king of the north, Persia. Many believe he was an example of the Antichrist, who would come in a much later fulfillment of the same prophecies. Think short peak Antiochus, taller peak Antichrist. And what I mean by that is the Antichrist will have the same behaviors as Antiochus, but they would be much, much worse. Think about it. Antiochus was known to be very proud. Antichrist will be so much prouder of himself that it will be hard to believe that anybody could have that kind of pride. Antiochus destroyed and violated the temple. The Antichrist will do that and do it much worse than Antiochus did. Antiochus set up a statue of Zeus in the temple and demanded the people worship Zeus. Remember, he was Greek, not Persian. He was Greek, but he was ruling Persia. And his family had been in Persia for a long time. But he worshipped a Greek god, Zeus. The Antichrist will set up an image of himself on the altar in the temple. And he will demand people worship him. There's that pride again. You know, the Antichrist will be the most powerful ruler the world has ever seen. Somebody says, well, I think this president is the Antichrist. They've said that about several recent years. Other nations, same thing. How many said Hitler was the Antichrist? Was he the most powerful ruler the world had ever seen? No. In his time, you had to go back to the Roman Empire, but some of those Caesars, they had more power than Hitler ever had. Hitler wanted the power. The Antichrist will rule over the entire planet. Well, the Roman Empire, as great as they were, they knew they didn't rule everything. Because when Alexander the Great was the Macedonian Empire, the Greek Empire, he stopped at the Indus River, turned around and went home. Rome never went that far. They had not conquered India, and they knew about China, hadn't conquered there. They hadn't conquered up to Russia either. They hadn't conquered North and South America. I'm not sure they knew about it. I mean, the Phoenicians did, but the Romans probably stuck their head in the sand. I don't know. Most powerful ruler the world's ever seen and will rule the entire world? Yeah, we haven't seen that yet. No president of the United States, although some of them think they're that powerful. A great many people will worship the Antichrist. Now, since this study is focused on Daniel's book and not end times, we're not going to go into more detail regarding end time concepts. For the most part, I'm going to do a little bit next lesson. However, you can find more information about end times in our study on the book of Revelation. And as I said, if there's enough interest, I will do a study on end times. It will take me a few weeks to prepare that. So don't be in a rush. Next lesson, next week, we'll do Daniel chapter 12. I'm going to see if I can complete Daniel in a half hour next week. God bless you. Thanks for letting me go a little bit long. I do love you. I do appreciate you. If you watched this long, I would love to see a comment that says, I watched it all the way to the end. I've never seen one of those. Bye-bye.